Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer is from the Chicago Tribune, and we are nearing the draft, almost 2 weeks away. A lot of visits to Hallis Hall, a lot of conversation about Caleb Williams. Dan, I think this is the quiet period, but there's still a lot of noise surrounding the draft and what the Bears will do at number 9, and of course, what they will get from their number 1 selection.
Particularly when you're in this seat, as the Chicago Bears are in 2024, you realize that there really is no such thing as a quiet period. And every time that you think that there is going to be a couple days or a week or something where nothing happens, something happens inevitably, and there's something to talk about. We get to put the college basketball season to rest. I don't know if you watched all the women's and men's action over the weekend, but I think before we get into any football, I need to know, was Aaliyah Edwards moving on that screen?
the UConn Iowa call you're referring to on Friday night, that was the right call at the right time, not just because I wanted Iowa to win, but you got to make that call. Yeah, it was extraordinary what happened with Iowa and South Carolina. 18.7 million viewers on average in the television audience Sunday afternoon. I think it probably has exceeded the men's audience on Monday night. I didn't see the ratings yet as we sit here on Tuesday afternoon, but I picked Purdue, so I was disappointed. UConn did everything right. They're a machine. Danny Hurley, like him or not, has done a terrific job with that program. And so UConn, yeah, and South Carolina, you have to say the best teams won.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's some years where the most deserving team isn't always the one that's on the stage. This year, both those teams were really, really good. And the thing about the men's championship game on Monday night, you just never felt like Purdue had a chance. I don't. There was 90 seconds in that game where I thought, oh man, they've got them right where they want them, and they're going to pull off this upset. That UConn team is stacked, just absolutely stacked. And I was thoroughly impressed before they beat my Illini by 40 points and thoroughly impressed after. They ran through the Big Ten in 3 tournament games, Northwestern, Illinois, and Purdue, all by the wayside, and Danny Hurley gets his 2nd straight championship, but I digress.
Yeah, Zach Edey gets 37 points. He's a runner-up. Caitlin Clark scores 18 points in the first quarter. She's a runner-up. Both those players had historically good final seasons as college basketball players, but I think that both made you watch a little bit longer. The fascination of Edey at 7'4", and Caitlin Clark is just to me was definitely worth watching every time she was on the floor, and you can't say enough about what the impact she had. But you're right, we digress. Bears draft. We're in the midst of a week where I think as we tape this on Tuesday, the Bears are having their local pro day for prospects in the area. I think there was a Ball State defensive back that I was told is
was
there.
It you?
And it was not me, and was not John Hoke either. But it was somebody who made quite an impression. They're hosting prospects of their top 30 visits. The biggest names, obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. in there Monday. Malik Neighbors reportedly in there on Wednesday. J.C. Latham from Alabama, the offensive tackle, Dan. So there's a lot of meet and greets, a lot of due diligence being done this week, and it's all part of the process.
Yeah, and we're leading up, as you mentioned, just 2 weeks away from all this dust settling and the Bears putting together a draft class, which by most accounts, given their current capital, is going to be smaller than we're used to seeing. But it will certainly be headlined by a quarterback and then whoever they choose to take at number 9. I thought it would be fun leading into the discussion about number 9 to throw a few questions your way. I had 4 that I wrote down. I wanted to get your take on some of these and then just kind of sound them out as necessary. But first and foremost, if the Bears get to a spot on night 1 of the draft where they're picking at number 9 and they have both an offensive tackle and a wide receiver that's on their must-have list, is there a position that you would prefer to have if you've got 2 prospects similarly graded and you deem both of them to be, we're not trading this pick away?
I think that's a question they've got to debate each and every day as you get closer. And I think the answer is always, it depends who it is. I think if you're weighing Joe Alt versus Roma Dunze, which is unlikely but possible.
Possible. It's definitely possible.
I think that you would probably go toward, I would probably say Joe Alt, because if my draft board says that he's the highest rated left tackle, then I think that he gives you the most predictable 5 to 7 years in terms of your window, and protecting the quarterback is never a bad thing. On the other hand, if he's gone and it's another offensive tackle versus Roma Dunze, I think Roma Dunze would probably be higher priority for me. So it kind of does depend. Generally speaking, philosophically, I do believe that you build from the ball on out. So I would, I guess, in any given year, think left tackle. But I do think this is a rare year because you have Caleb Williams as your rookie quarterback, and it'd be nice to have him kind of grow together with a rookie wide receiver, whether that's at number 9 or if you trade up to number 5 and get Marvin Harrison Jr., which is another scenario. So I think that's a long way of saying it would depend. But generally speaking, I would take the offensive tackle, the left tackle, over the wide receiver when I'm building a football team.
One of the reasons I thought this was conversation worthy is because shortly after Ryan Poles was hired in 2022, he sat down with a group of us in the House Hall media room, and we were just bantering about general topics. At that point, the Cincinnati Bengals were finishing off their run to the Super Bowl that season, and Ryan was discussing kind of how he viewed the Bengals draft the previous spring when they had the option of either taking Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell with the number 5 overall pick. And Ryan said going into it, his philosophy was that he would, being an offensive lineman, prefer to build the offensive line first. And he would have taken Sewell and never looked back and never apologized for it. But at that point, it was clear that Jamar Chase had made a difference to Joe Burrow's year 2 development and really propelled him forward. And so it was an example that Ryan used to say, look, you're always opening your mind when you see something elsewhere that works. I still think he would probably go down the path of prioritizing the offensive line over another pass catcher. The good news for him is that he set himself up for ultimate flexibility by acquiring Keenan Allen, by having DJ Moore, by drafting Darnell Wright, by having Braxton Jones penciled in. You feel pretty good about your tackle positions and your wide receiver position to a point where you can just have honest, candid decision and not be swayed by feeling the urge to steer in the direction of need. And so it'll be interesting kind of to see if that opportunity presents itself, how they navigate it.
I would hope that as executives, you maybe outgrow eventually what position you played in college. I would think that it's got to be an influence.
Yeah, I think it's both where you play in college and how you've observed the league over time, right?
Yeah,
In terms of what creates that success and that catalyst for success for your quarterback.
Like I always think it's interesting when you see like maybe defensive players who played college football on the defensive side of the ball end up being offensive coordinators or vice versa. And there are examples of that, but I always at what point do you grow out of that mindset and you have to make the best decision, or do you never grow out of that mindset? I'm not sure, but I think this would be a good litmus test. If both those guys specifically are on the board, whether it's Neighbors or Dunze, one of those two, and Joe Alt, what the Bears do if both of those guys are available, that will answer that question, because I think it's going to be impossible to know if he made the right choice. You're just going to have to trust his judgment in that case.
I wish we'd get an hour with Ryan after the draft ends to really just dig in on everything, because the draft's so fascinating. So many decisions need to be made, which brings me to my second question. If Matt Eberflus bangs on the table when you get to number 9 and says, hey, listen, there hasn't been a single defensive player picked in this draft. We want to take the top defensive player off the board. Who is it for you?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I think that they brought in the Dallas Turner from Alabama already, and I think he was the first one, and I think that he might be the top of the draft board for a lot of people. But the UCLA pass rusher Latu, he's intriguing, but he would scare me.
Yep.
And if I were drafting the middle of the first round, I might feel more inclined to take him than maybe in the top 10. But if I were drafting for a team, I would probably take more risks than I would probably be wise, and I wouldn't be employed for long. So I would probably take Latu. I would probably take the UCLA edge rusher, because I think that when you talk about what special looks like on tape, he kind of flashes those things, and at least what I have seen of him. And I would maybe roll the dice with him medically, which is always maybe not advised, but I do think he might have the biggest chance of making an impact on a defense that needs a very specialized skill to kind of complement Montez Sweat.
With Dallas Turner, I feel like there's things there explosive wise that catch your attention, and you say, man, like this guy's got a chance to be a real impact playmaker at the next level, but also seems more suited for a 3-4 outside linebacker position where he can stand him up, spread him out wider, let him use his gifts in ways that are a little bit more comfortable to him. Where Jared Versus and Latu are kind of more in that 4-3 realm that gets you there. I'm going to give you a name that there seems to be some increasing buzz from people I've talked to that you could justify taking at number 9. And if the Bears wanted to address the defensive tackle position and add teeth to their pass rush on the inside, Texas's Byron Murphy is a guy who's just really, really, without a lot of criticism and people I'm talking to in terms of the way he plays, high motor, instincts for the position, has power, can be an impact player against both the run and the pass. We know the Bears haven't done enough to shore up the defensive tackle position. As we're staring at the depth chart right now, you've got Andrew Billings as your starting nose. You've got Javon Dexter as your 3 technique, and Zach Pickens trying to figure out where he fits in year 2. I wouldn't be stunned if Byron Murphy was the direction that the Bears leaned at number 9 overall. Now, I think that you could make the case that if you could find a trade partner, you could move back 3, 4, 5 slots, figure out somebody that wants to come up for number 9, and you could still go and try to make that pick there with the comfort that there's going to be a menu of prospects that you'll feel satisfied taking regardless. But that it's a name worth throwing out here today on April 9th that is drawing a little bit of buzz.
That's interesting because that is the one area that would also check 2 boxes if they could justify, and who will ever know if he was the top player on the board defensively, also addresses big need position. So it would be accomplishing 2 things. That's why I think that if they do go defense, that there's going to be very little. The only way anyone might complain is if the other 2 guys that I mentioned were still on the board and they went defense with Alt and Adunze still on the board for whatever reason. So if those 2 guys are off the board, nobody could blame the Bears for wanting to go defense first if they indeed go that way. I like that, and you are definitely on the record now on April 9th of saying that Murphy would be a plausible choice.
Yeah, and I've been pretty firm in saying that no matter what the Bears do at 9, it's going to be a decision that on that Thursday night and that Friday morning and that Friday afternoon that we can all justify and applaud and say,
Yep.
makes perfect sense, unless they do something that completely stuns us. Which brings me to my third question out of 4, and it's what would tempt you to trade down? Now, I preface this by saying those in favor of trading down need to understand that that is something you can only do if somebody's willing to trade up. And so you have to kind of play that chess game and figure out how far down you're willing to go and what the return needs to be to entice you. But I'm curious from your angle, just understanding how deep this first round is, and particularly the top 25 of this draft is, what would cause you to get out of that 9 slot?
I think I would want a high second rounder, and maybe an additional mid-round pick, possibly, and obviously this year's first to move down. It would take probably 2 additional bodies. That would be players that could, one compete for a starting spot, which would be ideally a second rounder, and one kind of mid-tier guy that eventually could end up being, a potential starter. And then if I would want to go no lower than 15. So I think the parameters would be second rounder, mid rounder, no lower than 15. And I don't know if that's realistic or not. I think that probably you could justify asking for that, demanding that before you're thinking about moving down, because before you move down, when you do that, you're essentially prioritizing quantity over quality, because you have a chance at 9 to get somebody capable of superstardom in the NFL if it's a wide receiver. Now, tackles aren't necessarily referred to as superstars, but certainly you can get blue players at number 9. You go to 15, it reduces your chances. I wouldn't want to go any lower than that, but I would want the 2 bodies in return.
It's fascinating the way these conversations evolve, because probably a month ago it was, okay, the number 9 pick is going to be a good spot to be ready for a team trying to trade up for the 4th quarterback. Well, now the assumption is that the 4th quarterback is already going to be gone, and that there may be a team that might be willing to trade up for the 5th quarterback, be it Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. And if you're the Denver Broncos or the Las Vegas Raiders or somebody that feels desperate to get a quarterback, you might be interested in calling up the phone at Halas Hall and figuring out who answers and seeing if you can sell them. There's also talk that the receiver depth in this draft will create an opportunity for somebody to maybe come up for an Adunze or Neighbors if they fall to 9. And a team that obviously has been discussed since the Stephon Diggs trades is Buffalo being wide receiver needed. And are you willing to make a huge leap up? That's a huge leap, and that's something that Ryan Poles would have to get a huge haul for to justify going all the way back down to the low 20s. But there seems to be a perception that the phone will at least ring a couple times for the Bears when they're coming up with their second first round pick. And then it's going to be up to them to figure out what makes the most sense and what their board looks like at that point to get them that impact starter that they want to leave the draft with in addition to Caleb.
I just think the Bears have been very good or very consistent with trying to draft players maybe get in the second round who are very good players. A minus B plus type players, whatever, however you want to grade them on the color scale. But I think they have a rare opportunity in this draft to get two elite level players, and beginning with the quarterback, and then offensive tackle / wide receiver / edge rusher, whatever you take at number 9. So I don't think you want to pass up what could be a rare opportunity, knowing that you already, frankly, have maximized or gotten the most out of your draft capital in the 2024 draft by getting a Pro Bowl wide receiver, a multiplier edge rusher, and a depth piece on your offensive line in Keenan Allen, Montez Sweat, and Ryan Bates. So I think that you want to keep your eye on the prize and stay focused on the priority. And the priority to me would be get guys who are blue players.
Yeah, and it just really feels like there's an opportunity for this to become a landmark class for the Bears. To pair whoever that second pick is with the quarterback, and then we look back on this 15 years from now and go, "Whoa, that was it. That was the day it changed." And so we'll see how they handle it. My last question of the first segment is going to offer us a nice bridge to our second segment, and I asked this question to Brian Baldinger when we visited with him last week about Caleb Williams, and it's a question that Ryan Pace and his front office used to ask when they were in the building at Hallis Hall and they were evaluating the top tier prospects, and they would go through it at the end and say, why might this guy fail? We know all the things we love about him. Why might he fail at the next level in this situation? I asked it to Brian Baldinger. He gave us his answer, essentially said he was a little bit concerned that the temptation to play hero ball might be hard to rein in with Caleb Williams, and it might ultimately prove costly to his development in the NFL. I'm curious how you would answer that if you were sitting in the front office at Hallis Hall right now.
You've got to ask it, and I think it's a terrible way to look at it I don't like to look at things from a player's perspective or people that we talk about or cover in like, well, this is what they don't do, so let's find reasons to pick on them. I just think sometimes we do that too much, and it's okay to celebrate somebody in the positives, but for the sake of the exercise, I think Caleb Williams, you have to be concerned about a couple things, and this is what could go wrong if he fails. Number one, that he gets frustrated within the confines of any offense and wants to freelance or improvise in a way that he can't in the NFL and he could at USC. So, and he because of that tendency, starts to make mistakes, throw interceptions, be careless with the football, turn it over, and then begins to lose confidence. It becomes an avalanche of errors that and a decrease in confidence that he can't overcome as a rookie, and it snowballs. That would be a fear. The other thing would be just in terms of the public aspect, the part of we always talk about the Bears needing to be prepared for the Caleb Williams experience.
Yeah.
They've got to be very careful that he doesn't say anything that puts him in a position that he can't take back or that he regrets in a way that is lasting or indelible and shapes in his reputation in a way that you don't want to as a rookie in a veteran-laden locker room. You don't want to have somebody say, well, you can't unring that bell and do something like that. So there are two kind of things. Number one, on the field, if he improvises, forces mistakes, and causes a decrease in confidence. And secondly, in the locker room, in the organization, if he gets careless or brazen or some of the things that are, signs of immaturity that people are concerned about, if those things come true, if he puts himself in a position that he just can't undo.
We discussed this on our last episode when we played some of the audio from Ryan Poles and his own awareness and acknowledgement that it's not just assessing how a quarterback handles pressure, but it's assessing how a quarterback is going to handle pressure in this market, understanding where the patience levels and the expectation levels are going to be here, and then reacting to that with a word that you just used a minute ago, maturity, figuring out a way to be steady and mature with how you handle all of that. Again, Caleb won't turn 23 until November. He's still a young man trying to figure out life and adulthood and things that come along with being in the spotlight at every minute of every day. Well, that spotlight's about to get much, much brighter. It's about to get much, much more intense. And for someone that has grown up in an era where, social media has been at your fingertips since you were allowed to have a phone, whenever your parents put your first phone in your hand, you're going to have to figure out how to compartmentalize, how to adapt to that, how to deal with that, how to ignore, I've referenced this many times throughout my career and covering Coach K at Duke. He talked about in his younger years as a coach of learning how to ignore things, and that being a skill of knowing when you should respond to something and when you should just be aggravated by it, but just let it go and fly through. That's never been more important than in this era now, where everything is out there. And so it brings me to, as I said, our second segment here, where you think that there's going to be quiet times, right, on the Bears beat. It's a slow week in April. They're doing their top 30 visits. And then Greg McElroy, who's a football analyst, former quarterback at Alabama, was a 7th-round pick of the Jets, spent 2 years in New York, went on, played a 3rd year on the practice squad of the Bengals. He was on the This Is Football podcast with Kevin Clark, and he was talking about Caleb Williams, and he was expressing fears that Caleb has never, to this point in his football life or his regular life, experienced significant adversity. He said he's never really had real adversity that he's had to respond to and adapt to. And he wonders, and I think he used the words, quote unquote, a sense of entitlement with Caleb Williams having been as highly touted as he's been for as long as he's been, and wondering if he has the chip on his shoulder, like a Holmes, like a Brady, like a Peyton Manning. That's a story in itself. It becomes a bigger story when Caleb Williams quote tweets it, responds, and here's how he responded, David, at 2:02 p.m. on Tuesday, April 9th. He said, "Let's go back to school again," laughing emoji, facepalm emoji, "because I'm bored right now. Adversity, quote, a state or instance of serious or continued difficulty or misfortune." Then he goes on to say, "Year 1, didn't start freshman year. Year 2, popped hammy championship game first quarter, lost because of my hammy. Year 3, 7-5, my last year of college ball." End of tweet. So Caleb is pointing out, justifiably so, moments of adversity that he feels like he has experienced in his college career at Oklahoma and USC, and giving life to the fire of whatever it was that Greg McElroy was discussing on that podcast. And it just stopped me in my tracks, David, when I saw this tweet, because I was like, this is exactly what you're trying to research if you're the Bears through these last 3 months, is trying to figure out what is going to register, what types of criticism are going to trigger and register on the radar of Caleb Williams in a way where he reacts and responds. Now, is that an explosive response? It's not. Is it going to create headlines for the rest of today from anyone who is aggregating anything? I bet you Pro Football Talk's already got 4 stories up on it. I would almost guarantee it.
And using it as an example of why they should sign him quickly to get him in the organization.
So, but it's this example of what you and I have talked about, where you have to be ready for this. Caleb's got to be ready for it. The Bears have to be ready for the idea that you could just cue the police right now. I mean, the music group, the police, and every breath you take, every move you make will be watching you, right? And this is going to be an example. I'm looking at it now just so I can see it. This tweet is less than an hour old from Caleb Williams. It has 473,000 views.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Now, there's a fine line, because you don't want him to be robotic and insulated and afraid of the kind of public scrutiny he's going to receive, and it doesn't seem like he is. But you also want to be responsible, professional, and cognizant of the fact that you're representing the Bears organization every time that you hit send, and that's a very fine line to walk. And you also have, as the franchise quarterback, I've said it many times, I'll say it again, he is the de facto CEO of the organization, and with that comes a responsibility to represent that organization in a professional manner. So you want to be everything to everybody, but I don't think you can, you don't need to punch down. And I think that if you're talking about an opinion and not punching down, even, you don't have to acknowledge every criticism. And I think that he'll learn that maybe the hard way, but that is part of the thing you're talking about. And it's a good example of where the Bears have to realize if they have anybody in their organization capable of understanding how to do this, but they have to help him realize exactly what's at stake every time he goes public with these ideas.
Yeah. And my first piece of advice would be put your thumb on that X logo on your phone, wait till the little X above the X comes in, and delete that app off your phone. Just get rid of it. It's not going to serve you. Like net positive out of that is not going to be there. It's just not. And so I don't react to this in any sort of exaggerated way where I think Caleb Williams was in the wrong, or I don't think Greg McElroy was pulling out a blowtorch and now there's this big feud that needs to be settled. But it's just an example where now you're giving life to something that didn't need that life, and now other people around you may have to deal with that. And this is April, so you can understand how loud this is going to get if it's October and the Bears are 2-4 and Caleb's just played a poor game and someone throws a criticism out there and he decides to respond to it because he's bored right now. Right.
Right.
Then off you go. And
Right.
Here we are down this rabbit hole, and it becomes the entire week, and in this market, it becomes even more than the entire week. It's just a beast that you can't tame at that point. And so, like, for me, circling back to the last question I asked you the first segment, as we have this discussion in the second segment, that for me is why Caleb Williams might fail, is that he doesn't necessarily have the antenna or the discipline to lie entirely to be able to ignore and block out the noise in ways that's productive. He's going to have to navigate that. And I think he can. And I think the Bears think he can. And I think they can help him through that maturation process. But it is going to be in on the job training in this regard.
With age comes maturity. And I think that's also something worth remembering. Obviously, you hope he doesn't do something stupid before he acquires that maturity or develops that maturity. But I think that it's something to keep an eye on, no doubt, especially as we get closer to the draft.
And imagine if he has struggles and somebody goes on Twitter and says, I can't figure out what's wrong with Caleb Williams right now. And he comes back with maybe it's coaching.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So he was also the subject that was the Montez Sweat audio. How did the Montez Sweat audio come up on the Greenlight podcast with Chris Long? What did Montez Sweat have to add?
Montez Sweat was appearing on, as you mentioned, the Greenlight pod with Chris Long, always a good show. And Chris does a great job of diving down with his guests, and had Montez address a whole bunch of topics. One of them being what happens when your new quarterback walks into the building. And Chris was playing vague initially. Montez said, let's be real. We know who that new quarterback is, essentially, but was asked essentially how he would advise the new leader of the offense and essentially the new leader of the locker room to handle his business as he gets his feet on the ground at Hallis Hall. Here was the exchange between Chris Long and Montez Sweat.
Okay, so the next guy, whoever the next guy is.
Whoever the next guy is. Come on now.
Yeah, all right. All right, well, let's talk about
no,
it.
I'm playing. Let me stop.
Let's talk about it.
You never know. You never know, though. You never know.
You never know. But let's say it's Caleb.
Mm-hmm.
You get to talk to Caleb for the first time. He walks in the building. You're a leader. What's one piece of advice that you would give a young quarterback trying to be a leader in this league in a room full of alphas and veterans?
Be yourself. Don't try to do it all over the night, and just stay humble. Don't try to do it all by yourself. You got a great group of guys around you. I know you've seen the pieces, Keenan Allen, Swift from Philly.
Yes,
we got some guys that around him. So I could just be humble and be yourself. So, I mean, he's obviously a talented guy. I would just say just don't try to do it all in one night.
Good advice from a guy who is respected in that locker room, understands what it's like to come into a new locker room in Chicago, and also sounds like he sounds like a pretty cool guy.
What I like most about that clip, and I hope it resonates in the way that it should inside of Hallis Hall, is that it's an indicator of a guy on the defensive side of the ball readying to rally around the young quarterback and saying, look, like, you don't have to do this all yourself. You've got guys here. Like, just take it one step at a time. You don't have to rush yourself. You don't have to overextend yourself trying to become that guy here. The Bears need that. We know that there's sort of this worry on, okay, how's the locker room going to react to a new quarterback? How's the new quarterback going to prove himself to that locker room. The faster that the Bears sort of rally up around Caleb Williams, the easier it is going to be for him to be humble, to be himself, to push the direction of the organization in the way it needs to go without feeling like, oh my God, am I still trying to win everybody's trust and respect here?
I know you'll be one of the guys there and on the beat, and everyone will be writing that kind of idea and story. But don't you think that that's kind of a lesser concern or issue now that Justin Fields isn't there?
No
I mean,
doubt.
that was always that's going to be overstated, I think, and predict. That's going to be overstated because of how much we talked about it with Justin Fields kind of still there, so popular, on his way out. Will he stay? Will he go? What do they do with two quarterbacks? And now he's gone. I just feel like if you're Caleb Williams, that's almost a moot point. You walk in and people are happy to see you arrive. My God, this is the most talented quarterback that, as a Bear, the Bears players have ever seen in a Bears uniform. And from a fan base, oh my God, this is the most talented quarterback they've ever seen in person. So I wonder if that's going to be somewhat overstated and a concern that we find out to be moot.
Lesser concern because Justin Fields isn't there, but not non-existent. And we've talked about it before that, Jay Cutler came in with a personality that preceded him, and there was some question on, is this guy going to be prickly? Is he going to assimilate into a locker room that's already established itself and created bonds that he's going to have to connect to, And so that I think is part of the challenge here is there is a reputation of Caleb Williams that may be fair or unfair. It may be accurate or maybe inaccurate, but he's going to have to show these guys fairly quickly who he really is. And then who he really is going to have to resonate with that group for this rallying force that I described to kind of take root. And the faster that takes root, again, it will provide protection for Caleb Williams in situations like we just talked about. It will bring momentum to the things the Bears are doing. What you want to have happen, like say this tweet that we just talked about, if that blows up, you want people to come to your back within seconds of anyone asking the first question about it and being like, that's not a big deal in here, move on, we've got it, as opposed to guys in the corner of the locker room being like, man, I don't know why he's doing that, like we don't need that right now. And then all of a sudden you've got those little small fissures that lead to bigger things. And so
good point.
That's part of it.
It is. It's all part of it. It's all valid. It's all valid and everything in moderation, right? I just don't want that to be like the dominant theme of his first day at practice. And I don't think the way he throws the ball, it will be, because I think once people see the way he throws the ball and moves around in the pocket, I think people will quickly shift their focus from what he says and how he says it to how he throws and the way he plays.
No question.
All right, stadium conversation. You got some interesting stuff still from the owners' meetings as it pertains to Jerry Jones. I thought Jerry Jones was too busy funding the Arkansas NIL fund and hiring John Calipari away from Kentucky. What is Jerry Jones doing sticking his nose in Bears business?
We can now refer to Jerry Jones as a friend of the Take the North podcast, since he did do a short sit down with me in the hallway of the Ritz-Carlton in Orlando a couple of weeks ago.
I love that.
So thanks, Jerry. But essentially, I wanted to bring this up because it'll further our discussion a little bit. Myself, colleague Colleen Kane, and Bob McCoppin on the news desk at the Chicago Tribune are working on a bigger piece about some of the things that are going into the Bears' current vision to shift their focus away from Arlington Heights and to the museum campus on the lakefront. There seems, as you know, to be significant momentum to proving that this is something that is real and not just a very well orchestrated leverage play against Arlington Heights. What struck me in Orlando a couple of weeks ago was talking to people around the league who feel the genuine interest from the Bears in building their new fixed roof, 365-day-a-year venue on the shores of Lake Michigan. And for someone like Jerry Jones to stop and really kind of express his magnetism to the project that George McCaskey and Kevin Warren are pitching, and essentially as one of the guys who has been a model for organizations around the league on how you do a stadium right, how you think big and then think even bigger and create something that becomes bigger than anyone imagined it could. We talked a little bit to Jerry. I specifically talked to Jerry about how he is envisioning the Bear Stadium project. Now we'll play that first bit of sound and then we'll react. And then there's a second bit of sound. So here's Jerry Jones on that first part.
the project itself becomes a focal point for all the uses and all the potential uses that a venue like that can create. And so just the process of expanding your imagineering, your imagining,
right,
is very impactful. We just literally aren't the same the minute that venue came to place. And so it puts on steroids everyone associated with, including the teams that are involved, but it puts everyone in steroids. Officials, it's like
city officials, you mean?
It's city officials, your community. It's like you gave, like you did take a shot of steroids. And we just aren't the same in a positive way as we were when we built that, before that stadium was actively in our scene, so to speak. But your city leaders, your state leaders, everybody takes on a certain lift.
Yeah.
And I can't overstate the energy that a venue done right can give a community. And that in and of itself creates just multiplications of, frankly, economic activity. But just as important, it puts center spotlight on an area, and you say, well, these areas have always had a spotlight. This is Chicago.
Right.
Well, I will tell you this right now. Believe it or not, it can get more intense, and I'm talking all of these are positive things.
Yeah.
Positive things. You just don't come to the table without your best on.
Right.
Just as a phrase, you just don't do it. It just elevates everybody around. And I'm a big 1 and 1 is 3.
Yeah.
I'm not a 1 and 1 is 2. Sports does that. Sports creates an intangible. And of course, this venue is not per se just sport, but it certainly lets you capture the intangible value that is there, and that's the sweetest meat.
Interesting. He's going to obviously look at Jerry World as a rousing success, and it is. There's nobody that can argue really with anything he talks about, how it magnifies everything and it makes things bigger than they might be right now. The thing that people will push back at is, it worked in Arlington, it worked in Dallas. At the time they did that, I think everything fit together, and you could say 1 + 1 = 3, and there was intangibles that were created by that building, and certainly football in Texas, that can't be ignored. I don't know if this is the economic or political climate in Chicago where you can do that kind of math. The math has got to be different, and 1 + 1 can't = 3 for this project to take off. And I don't think it will, if that's what they're counting on, because I don't think there are enough people that recognize that same thing the way he described it.
Certainly, we needed our friend Luke and Ellis there to push back on the steroid usage that he was talking about. Obviously, figuratively in that case, in terms of of the way that it just creates an energy and an ambition, right, for an organization and a region, really, to try to think different and think bigger with everything they do. And so that's the intangible that he referred to as the sweetest meat. I think you are right that every city, every market has a different calculus to it, different computations that need to be used, different political dynamics that you have to sift through. I did follow up, and there's another soundbite here from Jerry just asking him how specifically he felt the organization wasn't the same after Jerry World came into being. Obviously, the Dallas Cowboys were the Dallas Cowboys long before AT&T Stadium was erected in Arlington. Here was his answer to that follow-up.
That you guys haven't been the same since. Can you think of specific ways where you feel different, where you feel that lift?
We just expect to associate with the best in entertainers, the best in sports. The Olympics seem like it ought to be in our left pocket.
Yeah. World Cup.
You just take a World Cup. You just take a different expectation, and we all know that the biggest sale of an individual is what's in its mirror, what's looking back at him in the mirror or her. That's where you need to do the selling, because if you get that entity, so you can reach new heights. So I would say the number one thing, other than the tangible way to figure how to figure expenses, the number one thing it has just lifted. We became something totally different in every scale: financial, scope, expectation, perception. Every scale took us to a completely different.
When you say
we being Arlington, we being North Texas, we being the Cowboys, we being individually, you just took a different scale. And,
think big vision,
that's an intangible I'm talking about. You can obviously see where we have events that we never had, but those are accountable. Those are, you can put your finger on those.
Yeah.
But there's something bigger going on here.
Right.
Much bigger. And this will. Chicago has such a fabulous potential because of just its population as well as its iconic American status.
Right.
This will give them this will add to and become, from the standpoint of eyeballs, media. One of the things that we're the proudest of is the eyeballs. It's misplaced.
Yeah.
The interest in eyeballs. It should go to job creators. It should go to healers, teachers. But in our society, events and the people that entertain, and certainly sports, create a lot of stories, a lot of incrementally additive stories.
Yeah.
This is the best example, our example of 1 and 1 is 3, the intangible part of it. Going and away was the biggest value, and it has lifted the economy, it has lifted the stature. It's all there. We just aren't the same the minute that we plug that into our identity at AT&T Stadium.
I mean, he's convincing, and he believes what he believes, and they certainly have the track record and success in Dallas. I just think it's hard for me to apply all that went well and right there to what's going on in Chicago and Arlington Heights. I do think those additive stories that the way he referred to it, it's hard to get. I mean, I don't know the exact date when they started this in Dallas or in Arlington, but
2009 is when it opened.
It was a different world 15 years ago, and I think when you look at the major cities right now, in Chicago, it's frankly hard to dismiss the other priorities, in terms of migrants, pensions, teachers, police, law enforcement, all the other things that you prioritize dollars for, public dollars for additive stories or the value of a sports franchise. I think that, and the Cowboys and Jerry Jones received public funding and assistance for Jerry World. That's documented. I just don't know that beyond the McCaskies pledging $2 billion, if that the rest of it coming from the public side of it is feasible in 2024 the way it was in Dallas in 2009. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3 in 2024 Chicago. It just doesn't. Even though there are examples around the country where public government public subsidies have been used, I just think it's a tougher equation here, and it's a different thing. Things have to add up a little bit more than I think Jerry Jones realizes, even though he sells it, and that is why he does and is who he is. But that's a very interesting interview.
Uncle Jerry will be happy to join us anytime. He told me, so we'll see if we can get him back on. But to your point, like I do think that look, like this is a little bit of a stage setter to what's coming this month here in Chicago. I'd expect before the month is up for the Bears to have their press conference with their drawings and their video and their explanations, and then their chance to answer questions, of which you just presented a half dozen off a list that is likely to include 30 questions that need to be answered before they're going to get any sort of even significant interest, much less buy-in to what they're selling. Obviously, the Bears have a long way to go to make this a reality, but the push is going to come here soon, and they're going to stand up there, and they're going to pitch for it, and there's going to be a lot of things to sift through once we get there. Within the league, obviously, they've got some receptive ears. The interesting thing about the Cowboys in some extent is they left Dallas. They went to Irving for a little while. They now are in Arlington playing. And so it wasn't playing in Dallas city limits that meant the most to them, or that wasn't the best opportunity that they ultimately settled on. I don't know what that means as far as it relates to the Bears. But again, this is a complicated saga. I know you've spent a lot of airtime on this here recently, and we're going to spend a lot more on it in the years to come. But certainly interesting to hear a longtime guy with experience in the industry describe some of those things in that way, and then give us the opportunity to react to them.
No doubt, one of the NFL's most influential owners. No question. It's a good voice to add to the conversation. And this has been a good conversation. A lot of stuff that we talked about, a lot of ground recovered, Dan. I don't think what else do we miss?
I woke up, Tuesday thinking like we're not going to have a lot of meat on the bone to talk about. And look where we are. We're almost 48 minutes into a conversation about a number of topics that I think are significant. So there is no quiet time, and there is no boring time with the Chicago Bears these days.
No doubt about it. And we will be back later this week to look at the latest and maybe take some of your questions to our mailbag. If there is anything that you want to know, send us an email, takethenorthpod@gmail.com, or tweet at us at takethenorthpod on X or Twitter. And you can send us direct messages too, if you can. Just keep them, polite, without profanity. I was dealing with that a little bit earlier this week with just kind of be nice on Twitter, guys. All right. But if not, that's fine too. All right. I think we can wrap things up. For Adam Sudzinski, our producer, Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune, I'm David Haugh. Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.